Hello everyone, today we talk about the importance of moral forces. As you know, this is a term that I drew from the Clausewitzian vocabulary while reading and commenting the von Kriege, and I know that at this point most of my followers have probably missed that phase in Schwerpunkt's history. As you know, I'm not making at the moment videos about von Clausewitz. We arrived circa at 2/3 of the von Kriege, and we will have to finish it at some point. Just now I'm re-uploading many videos for the technical issues that I already informed you about, so it's a bit of yet another phase of Schwerpunkt that is in part of way just to re-acclimatate in a sense the audience to what Schwerpunkt was about. But since the Clausewitzian videos didn't have any of those issues for which I in fact I would have had to re-upload them, those are not going to be re-uploaded. Those are fortunately there in accumulating views and likes, albeit I realized that very few people actually watch it in the first place. This is actually a problem. I will address it in my next channel update video, as I essentially believe that there are some things that have gone wrong over time, mainly in the direction of, let's say, a very, narrow interest in very specific topics that people come across, let's say, just through mostly the YouTube search, and I've made them, and therefore they subscribe, thinking that for some reason I talk about certain things rather than others, or I come from a certain background rather than another, and they miss a bit what the whole point of the channel has been since the beginning. I see it chiefly from the stats, meaning if I upload a video, I don't know, that contains the word Germanic, I get triple views of any other video, independently from times and places. It's just if that's the drive, of course I can exploit it, but at the same time that's random in choice, and I observed that it's not really it's not really where I would have liked the channel to head towards, right? As the content is intended really as a wall, right? Sometimes you get people that still that legitimately maybe start listening to one of my videos for the first time. They hear of me, they found the channel, and they of course don't know all the rest I've done, right? And so that, to me, you see, if you go to a professor and you say, I've read this book of yours, and this thing, according to me, I don't know, is wrong, and that professor knows perfectly well that you may miss that point because you haven't read basically anything else about all the rest of the topic. That professor tells you in the first place, especially if he has treated the topic, is go first read all the things I wrote about that, and then come ask me something. And this is a matter of etiquette that I know. Of course, on YouTube we're not in a university context, but I believe that it would be useful at least to check what I've done before, if I ever address, because at this point I've made almost 1,200 videos, and there is surely something I said about given topics that I discussed elsewhere. So many things actually, from my perspective, I haven't covered. Like, to me, we are still at the very beginning of the whole thing, meaning that the things I would like to talk are so rarefacted for the sort of sparse compared to what I would like to this thing to be, almost kind of an encyclopedical thing. I always feel as if I hadn't explained enough, and sometimes it happened that there was a question I had never discussed, the thing I answered with a video. That's also a pretty useful thing, making questions and so on. So the reason why I talk about moral forces today is that, albeit there hasn't been any specific curiosity about them from the audience, meaning that nobody ever complained and say, well, what are these moral forces, right? It's a term that I used, for example, in my doctoral thesis. At some point, my tutor said, she confused essentially the legitimately also, if you've never heard the Clausewitzian term, or understanding properly the concept of the moral dimension altogether. So not just a matter of ethics, but literally of intellect, even of neurocognitive dimensions. So all what pertains to what you go on with by software, in a sense. It says there's not much morality in this context. The superiority of moral forces. Sometimes it sounds, I must give you that I got used to the term myself at the point that I completely bypass any problem as far as fact as I've seen that nobody has objected to it. But it's together with other definitions, such as, for example, I started using term community to define, the population partaking, a certain political and social dimension, rather than, using society as it's mostly used nowadays to define the at least a political community, or somebody at least living within under a certain state, or in a certain space together with others. There are these semantic shades that I have been I've been using mostly for the sake of vocabulary refinement. I'd say I think those were more important choices and so on. And moral forces especially has come dramatically on the fore for many reasons. It started with von Clausewitz, but then I began to test such. It was already part of my life experience, meaning properly of what about morale, right? Properly, and ever since I was a kid, I remember when I made I had tests or examinations, things like these. I always pictured in my mind my army being trained intensely for preparing for that campaign, right? Maybe an examination was like a campaign with several, with some battles that you were the single professor's question that you had to have prepared your army for, and at that point, I applied with some kind of unpredictability, as in real war, commanding them through that kind of exchange. There is yet another aspect that I perhaps approach more and develop more, especially on Schwerpunkt, regarding this concept of pure action. Right, it is paradoxically is a Clausewitzian one, but it can be applied to many cultures historically speaking, to many religions, to many cultural, let's say, also in fact properly moral systems, right? The sense that that at the, for example, at the base of military effectiveness, there has to be political cohesion of some sort, right? And that certain peoples historically, kind of in the way we see them sometimes simplistically in rising and falling, actually were floating basically over this very unstable, ever-changing and unpredictable, in fact, substratum of moral forces. To say, what do you do things for? How do you like them? How much commitment you have in order to make things happen? In reality, that just physically speaking, always going to bring you down in a way or another, right? It's this is the second principle of thermodynamics. We're all going to succumb, right, to if anything, to physicality, but morally speaking too, we have essentially a certain charge that, even if you think about it in age, has some trend, right, biologically speaking, and that in fact did influence even the political and the military and social structures accordingly. And moral forces are, in my recent research, come on the fore also for personal reasons, because when you take things always to the next level for a long time, and that definitely takes a toll, right? We all know that the more you want to achieve, the more you have to work. This is apparently at least in my view. Lots of people want to get free stuff just without doing anything, or just pretending that their existence is motivating some calories being spent. Nobody really understands at that point by whom, in order to receive this kind of products deriving from that work. But I can tell you that as a military historian, as somebody that specialized willingly in this field, and that feels very much for probably the art of war strictly meant, so all the strategical and tactical implications, even if aside from von Clausewitz and some, the battle videos, those are tactical analysis. I'm mostly a tactician. Like my doctoral thesis was specifically about tactics, also about strategy, but strategy is more complex, right? It's not just a matter of being more difficult, it's that properly it requires sometimes certain info that we, it's more difficult to reconstruct, but we may also not have so satisfactorily to determine certain things, because in fact moral forces are the most difficult to be measured in any context. And this is it's a broader philosophical problem, not just a strictly historical one. But the point I was making is that even having passed now, as you know, beyond, as a having finished the research, there was, believe me, I did put a lot of strain. I maintained control, I remained in charge, that I've always been there to fundamentally that helped stabilizing myself, and it still does, I must say. And it's been useful, right? I can proudly say that Schwerpunkt helped much more my thesis than, what my thesis helped Schwerpunkt from a historical point of view. And mostly for this diachronic and comparative approach that I have, that I'm, trying to lay out as a method. Also, in order to understand it, fundamentally, you can't understand war if you don't, first of all, get in the technicality of how it was waged, and secondly, properly throughout all history, right? Which is, in fact, what many so-called military historians at this point have no clue of, right? And because they don't study properly the art of war, maybe they can't even give you a real definition of it, of the two. What's the difference? And so in this next step that have occurred in this year, I also went through was something less pleasant in terms of sentimental matters, and it took an enormous toll, and I still have problems about that. And I think it's normal to have problems, but it's as if I noticed now that all these things had intertwined, right? It's not just about that. It's about the fact that in the last year and a half, almost 2 years, as a matter of fact, you say, it's a pandemic. Well, the pandemic didn't really help to set a pleasant stage, but I must say that in other ways it even helped me indirectly, even if it sounds pretty cynic to say. To me personally, practical matters that I exploited, but surely not, on people's skins. A set of tragedies struck either, mostly my families or people that I knew, and I lost I lost a lot of things in the process, right? I'm a person who, in this, as you understand, I'm pretty obtudinary, and I have this way of seeing a purpose on the long run as a long-term investment. That really requires a lot of moral forces in a specific amount of time, because you're not just diluting that on an activity that more or less well, this is just it, when it's gonna end. Now this things can go astray quite easily in life, and having lost, for example, these people, literally, including for example, a person that was my ideally my military history mentor, and that was in this sense very intellectually attached to, and who passed away quite suddenly, and I remained, it's as if I had remained without captain. And I'm a person that I frankly don't, together with other people, because there was a sense of community there, a sense of esprit de corps, and I'm a by character a lone wolf. I never follow anybody, but that was for me an important blow, and I recon that. And even if after all it wasn't too much in human contact with that person, it ended a phase of my life because I participated to a community that after the death of that person basically collapsed, finished, right? So I've been cut off from an important human interaction in that sense among people who shared my same interest. Then I've lost some relatives. Others got sick with horrible diseases, and I experienced COVID. Not myself, but very close people, and probably also lost one because of that. I and I had this, this heartbreak fundamentally that surely didn't help. So I had also arguments for stupid problems, regarding environmental factors. I had, definitely environmental problems, issues, and this kind of repressed rage almost, because I would like sometimes to break somebody's neck, but that wouldn't be particularly helpful for my future and career and lifestyle. Because I tend to present myself as a kind of a equilibrated person, but behind this face I'm actually pretty pretty sensitive and mostly emotional. Like I have strong feelings quite easily, and that is something that has driven me, as a matter of fact, as a moral dimension. But I could feel, what I mean is that I could feel fully the blow of this, and what happened that scared me as hell. Okay, let's not exaggerate, maybe not quite, but let's say it made me very, very aware of this moral dimension, is that I haven't quite, if not just tested this blow in a, let's say in a theoretical sense. Like it's easy, you study the Funkrieg and you there are certain passages that are very moving, right? The von Clausewitz is completely the opposite of the bloodthirsty kind of scrupulous or completely cold and cynical individual. He's a person who, when addressing the fatigue, the tiredness, the sufferance, the pain, the horror of war, is writes some of literally one of the most poetic lines that I've ever read, right, in literature. And because this person experienced them firsthand basically throughout all his life, so much that he joined the Prussian army at 12 and also died essentially also in campaign at the time, also but for illness. Which, so just think the world that produced that individual, that author, and that in his work. It's not just me. Another thing is getting through certain things that after all are relatively common things, like losing people or being rejected or things like that, are pretty common, right, in life. And yet this thing was such a again, I remain completely in control of myself. It's just, it was hard, right? It was hard. I can say very hard, because if I think worst things that can happen, definitely those would be very hard. These things were hard, and it took a toll on me. So the interesting aspect of this is that I intertwined essentially all, like this is the point, that the more I rose up in this stage, and also essentially saying, okay, basically I'm devoting myself to this specific craft, also without essentially too many prospects of career or future, because frankly, yes, I fortunately I can leave even out of rent mostly. It's not that the problem. I'm always open to earn money, of course, but that's not the point entirely. The point is that, of course, after all this, like I've been studying for 21 years, right? Even more considering that. I lost a couple of them, but fundamentally got to this point. And after all this, so technically, I don't consider myself this great much, historically speaking, but Of course, I earned my chevrons in the process, and remaining out there like without any reference, without what do you do now, and not really seeing much more than this interest in knowing ever more and more, and just telling people sometimes, or like this, for example, on Schwerpunkt, or mostly in the most serious way, writing articles and books and things like that, seems like, you're a waste, right? Not that I would like to do who knows what, right? The theory is the academic career, because effectively that's what the PhD is meant for. I will start a series, as I said, on how the research went, but I must avow that it's partly because of this moral dimension that I still haven't, right? That I still haven't found the strength to talk about it, and also to change things. Maybe it's also all this re-uploading now. I can tell it's exhausting. It's consuming a lot of time. It will take ages before it's done. That helps in a way, and that was my moral, right? I had to pay for it because I had done a mistake, and I had to repair for it. And actually, I feel pretty blessed by the fact that no problem had ever occurred, and I'm doing this out of a moral scruple, as you know. But I factually hadn't come into anybody's rage, or say a lamentation because of the complaint. It's just that I do it for the channel to survive, first of all, to exist, because at that point any copyright strike might have occurred into an escalation could have taken out the channel. So now we are fully safe. So that's the important thing, and I'm doing this willingly. But I can tell you that it's as if all this existential, historical, and even the most material aspects of this all were all intertwined. That is to say, I feel as if there was no difference within the whole thing. And part of the reason is that, of course, to me, history has taken on an existential meaning that is far beyond, of course, the idea of a profession in itself. Of course, there is all a dimension of that must be taken into consideration. And in fact, I'm also feeling challenged at that point, because I can tell you, even just mechanically, that the thing I've done was exhausting. It was an enormous thing, and so I guess it's normal to have a moment of relax. After all, I finished everything in July, and now maybe I just starting to recover, but it could take more. But all the other things that came kind of increased the burden, the weight, and I resented this. I can tell you, even in the day, I have some issues with adrenaline. I still can't get over certain things, because I believe that, in fact, what I was struggling for was not, given that I was interacting with another human, and that was the most important thing fundamentally. It could, I was presenting some kind of civilized, ethical, important concerns about, have literally living in a future together with her and all these things. But in the moment in which, if you really believed it, because it had never happened to me, right? It happened when I was very, very, very young, and then then even my exes I didn't really love. This thing was something else, and so you see, there were so many points connected even to history in that thing, that I felt as if that failure reflected itself even on my capacity as a historian, and the fact that this wouldn't be understood from the other side made me feel even worse about that. Meaning that I understand again that these things happen, but in that sense, history was what united us in a deeper sense, even more, to strengthen even more that kind of bond we had. And this this thing that happened as if broke everything, and exactly in a moment in which I felt very powerful, in which I felt very successful and very effective, and this year would have had to be the most beautiful in my life. Instead, it turned out to be, well, maybe not the worst, but something close to it. And again, if this is the worst in my life, I can consider myself lucky indeed. But still, again, I was impressed by how hard that moral force really was. And so when I think about war, as I do every day, I always feel a dramatic distance between what what we study, what we learn about war, all these things, and the actual twist that this moral dimension is, right? Because there is let's leave aside here. Today I really live by the Clausewitzian Trinity. Let's be honest about that. I believe it's correct. I measure it scientifically. It's a real thing, right? Von Clausewitz didn't quite invent it as he simply read it within, from the sources, from the direct experience. It's real. And I can assure you it's real, and it's a dramatically useful tool for teaching military history. The question, though, is that there is naturally a scientific problem, right, in researching, in inquiring, in making history strictly meant. That is to say, yes, we basically we don't know all what we would like to know about war, right? And there are these indicators that fundamentally give us some info, some evidence of what things were like. The problem is that altogether it's very difficult in history to arrive to a definite consensus, right? One thing is, of course, being expert in a specific field, and therefore knowing that certain things, like there is some harder evidence that is more difficult to debunk. But it's paradoxically exactly in that situation that how first of all, how much, of course, we don't know again, but also how difficult it is to interpret history altogether when looking at certain some at a broader range and at a broader horizon, and that we make up for by maybe some ideology, some kind of a view that we have of things. And what is frustrating from a historian's point of view is that you encountered this problem, right? You encountered this problem, and you know how difficult it is to cope with that, and it makes you almost crazy because you say, I have to really, see through that. I have to understand it, and often I don't have time. Often I'm just passing by, but I would like to. And then you meet with a world that you realize that doesn't even care, right? And I'm not talking about the world in general. I'm talking even about other historians. That is to say, the other historian's motivation may be just publishing that article for practical purposes, rather than actually having a broader, comprehensive understanding of certain things that are actually very important. Historiography in this sense is extremely slow, because something that could be done, like I've done in 3-4 years with COVID, actually, it's something that sometimes you have to await hundreds of years of historiography to come up with, because the historiographer reasons in terms, okay, if I have something new to say, I can fraction it. At this point in history, by the way, because before it wasn't quite like that. Before, there were great scholars with, a synthesis capacity that we, modern historians or scientists in general can't even dream of. But at least, so they fragment all the thing in many tiny bits so that they can sell them, right? It's almost a marketing strategy, and it has nothing to do with gaining that synthesis capacity that, especially in military history, is so crucial to partially fill those gaps that will remain not even seen, right? And they exist though, because people simply will either squish in between or not really even acknowledge that they are there, and will simply point out some kind of dot here and there that then they will try to unite in some weird fashion, while all what it would have taken would have been to study comprehensively the whole thing and having a real plastic vision of what that thing is about, from a political, military, and social point of view. So you encounter also with a lot of resistance, a lot of almost incredulity, or I don't know to say this, but even a suspicion, because it says, who's this guy? Why has he written this thing? What is the thing? And at some point you go so beyond that maybe even the local expertise, in fact, that you're not even taken in consideration, not because they can't see, they say, oh, this means, this is not good. No, they understand that. They understand that you've done a great thing. It's just that they haven't reasoned so much that scale that they can't even concretely recognize what that work means, and what is the practical use of that, and why it should be, why it's so important, what's the point, what's being done like, right? I've met with correctors, that is professors, and were in theory experts, etc. They would basically predicted everything they could tell to me, not because I knew what they would spot that I knew was maybe to correct within my thesis, but because I knew that they were fixated with a certain topic rather than another, and they would completely miss the entire point, or at least they wouldn't be they wouldn't accept it for some reason, right? But properly in a cognitive sense. And it's not a complaint. I mean, frankly, I'm glad about that, because of course I know what my work is about and how it unfolds. But it's frustrating to see that the system works with essentially a sort of blind obedience to scholarly standards that are, let me tell you, not this much. Like, it's always my point of view. Like, everybody that hasn't he's an expert in a certain field, of course, should better listen to the experts. The problem is that and you can legitimately doubt of them too, right? You should form kind of opinion critical thinking. The problem is that until you're not an expert, generally speaking, you don't have that yourself. So people tend to follow in a kind of a fatalistic fashion these things. The point is that when you arrive there yourself, you understand that how dramatically you think that this experts actually know that we live in a world where experts are actually competent people, in the sense that they have a clear scientific understanding connected to a substantial ethical backbone, or all these things. No, we don't, and it's scary. And if the mass knew at that level, but I guess we all specialize in something we can approach at this point, kind of the understanding more or less what this is by scale. But let's say in general, there is almost a fideism, a fatalism towards the expert. The expert very often is, let me tell you, not very impressive. And I can tell it because I'm kind of expert now about something myself, and I know from one side how much it costs, but at the same time I also know that it's not enough regarding what we would like and what we should know. So the moral force in this sense arrives at a level where you're also starting to wonder, what do I have to do with this? Like, existentially speaking, right? What is that what am I doing in the first place? Literally, I mean, we will read my stuff and say, okay, well, we understand this, or we see this as an important thing in the future, right? How many people will be interested in early 14th century in the future, and especially with the nuisance and the perspective and the motivation that made me arrive to that point and try to provide people with a better insight, in a sense. Of course, at this point you would say, well, you should have explained that. Well, I tried, but again, don't think that things, even well written, and I think that the Frankrig is the perfect example of that, are actually understood in the same way, right? I see a lot of, let's say, of attacks, in a sense, generally speaking, almost by default, and towards you see, it could be about authority, as I was just saying, but it's different, right? Because expertise it's not always authority, right? And think about the disgusting approaches that has been, that the von Clausewitz received in the 20th century with, a little heart, with Keegan, right? So people that haven't literally even read the Vom Kriege, because if they had done, I don't think that they would be so cognitively stupid not to understand literally the first elementary things. That is to say, properly, they haven't, right? They haven't read that. They don't even know what is written in it concretely, right? Because, it's easier for somebody, because how many people are really interested in von Clausewitz, right? A person that makes 1/3 of the job on it and pretends that, it's still more than the average, right? So, and maybe there is not many other people that do it in the first place, so those can't be authoritative because they fill their mouths with, I don't know, with von Clausewitz, with, with this and that, and then eventually haven't even started that. There is a broader issue here that I'm trying, you see, the moral force, it's like following this red trail into nothingness, into obscurity, because I matured my understanding in the last year or so, or maybe slightly more. It was an old thing that there's been a collapse in terms of moral quality of the individuals. There is no doubt that it is to say the peak of literally of our civilization, in a sense, in terms at least of capability of producing an effective synthesis from a scientific point of view in the elites, was between the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, right? Most of what I believe and stick to, morally speaking, fundamentally lays in the 19th century, right? That is also, and a certain part of it, meaning that the 19th century starts to be like a monster with, lots of heads that you can't even, reconnect fundamentally. There are so many disgusting things emerging, such as communism, such as racism, things that actually were always there in the first place, but by some degree in the past, because some utopias and discrimination are proper of the human race in itself, or not just invented at some point. But I'm reflecting properly on the fact that there doesn't seem to be in the near future like a capacity to re-hierarchize the whole system in a positive direction, and it seems really a bad situation, because I've seen some parallelisms with other ages, and I don't think that what awaits us is this progressive dream that we have thought for. Actually, it will be not just a moment of stagnation for a while, but also of further hierarchization, not necessarily on the moral basis that we think and we hope, right? This is a moment in which the individual will effectively lose freedom, will lose liberty, to say it better, properly in the in fact contractualistic meaning of the term, right? And that there is a role that you have to fulfill in here, and saying, who will I be, right? Will I be like in the same, I don't know, with after the crisis of the mid 14th century, like a courtier paid by some lord just to write his own history? Well, surely I don't fit that. I feel like most of the dying Republicans, in a sense. I believe still that there is some moral force, in fact, that should be evenly distributed, should be, properly taught, right? Also with authority and hierarchy and order and discipline and firmness, and that's exactly what I believe that moral forces here lack there, right? Because it's very easy to channel a horde of brainless idiots, like the ones that we are fundamentally nurturing at all levels since some generation now, that are completely detached from reality, and that will just be used as a tool, fundamentally, in a sort of neo-feudalism that is already in place, and that will hopefully make something good. It's somebody, I think the average person is lost now, right? We're completely, like, all the hopes and possibilities, like, they're they're done for, right? There is no hope for them. The point is for the elite to be, to be something, and it doesn't seem that this elite, the new elite at least, seems to be so. So there is a struggle going on right now. I will not descend in politics, but let's say that that makes quite evident how even the purpose of somebody who is searching for some kind of scientific correctness doesn't seem to be quite appreciated, right? Simply because people still confuse science with a bunch of buckets of some information with what actually science is. That is a method, and they simply have lost the plot completely. I think we are facing a catastrophe from a moral and intellectual and educational point of view that has no precedence in human history. For the degree of property of detachment from positive and practical applicational capacity and ideas and thought, moral system, ethics, and so on. So moral forces in such a picture are not particularly, like, I feel as if I were exploding still in moral forces. I still feel pretty young and energetic, and I would like to do so many things. And when I was younger, I thought I would do those things. And then I arrive at this point, and life puts like a strong brake on you and says, whoa, slow down, look at what happens when you think that certain things were possible, and then you... Yes, but this is, I guess, the point of moral forces is that nobody likes to suffer. So humans are driven away from sufferance, from the idea that something is hard and difficult and displeasant, let's say, should be avoided in a way or another. This is not really, however, a rational or scientific or, in fact, moral argument. You would argue that at that point it's easier just to follow a sort of trail, and this is exactly the fatalistic trend that I completely loathe, right? I believe in action in any sense, even if it's just, can be just intellectual. I don't like to consider myself as an intellectual, never did, because in fact I always appreciated more facts over words, and generally speaking speculation and abstract ideas, right? And I believe, and I have learned through von Clausewitz, that there is this sacrifice you have to make. That is to say, if you really care about what you do, and whatever it is, right? It can be about a family, wanting one, or building one, and making a huge effort that is really a lifetime commitment, or career that is something less but still dramatically important in that scale, and lots of other things, whichever they are. You have to be willing, of course, to suffer, right? It's not a magic. There's no. Let's say there would be a manual, but just to be aware that things can go wrong, and at that point you have essentially to gamble. We have to accept that there is no always happy ending. Actually, human life is by itself always not with a happy ending. But more than that, it's important what you have done in life, right? It's not about being happy or temporarily. I want to be happy. Like how many people you meet that want just that, right? I want to be happy. I want to avoid any problem. I want to avoid any criticism. I want to avoid any discussion. And then what? To do what? To achieve what? Right? Just to fulfill your most immediate needs until you die, fundamentally. That's not a civilizational value. Civilizational value means that you have to make a dramatic effort to improve yourself at all levels, to become a more effective and capable person that can really provide him or herself with that capacity to do more and achieve more, right? Achieving is not bad, right? It's being demonized, but these people say it's not important about being successful. It's about it's about being happy. I agree that success, as we have intended us, that is to say, having this kind of standard formal validations from a system, in fact, it doesn't seem quite to be working fine. I agree, but it's not that much. But read success in a sense of achieving something. That is to say, managing, even with all the difficulties and the struggles, to get something, right? For example, pick Schwerpunkt. It's hardly a success, but it's still an achievement, right? I believe that what I've earned by doing this stuff has been dramatically useful. It's an asset that, by the way, can't be stripped of unless I completely melt my brain. It can't always happen, quite quickly in a way, but these things unfortunately do happen. But in a sense, it's something that allowed me to get to a point where I know that I see the sacrifice. I see inherently the fact that having discovered certain things has brought me not much personal joy at the level of, for example, being understood by other people, seeing the world the same way that other people do, and having to cope with that. But surely it has provided me with some better insight toward on life and the world and history that I think is useful, and that most people run away from. Right? In the last year or so have also been the moment in which I acknowledged finally this reality made of paranoia, essentially, of cognitive dissonance, of denial of reality. That's yet another thing. I think it's a feature of our times. It's a feature of this almost late imperial prevalence of the Chthonic, Dionysiac forces of people that fundamentally give up because they failed before even having started, because they are not given a reason. They don't see an immediate result. They don't have the moral and material tools to reason in a long-term strategy or capacity, and so they abandon themselves to certain ideas and certain delusions that we can all relate by a certain event. There are things like that, right? In the last year, for example, I realized that it was too attached to my channel's growth, right? That now that, for example, it's slowed down because of all this re-uploading that I'm doing, not particularly much, but still significantly. I said, what you were putting a lot of expectation on that, and you've been legitimately frustrated in the process, so that this told you how real it is, the fact that after all there are some limits, that it may not be it taught me to reason in a more concrete manner, and that's how you have to be exposed to reality. But there is in all this a commitment, there is an investment, right? And this has to do with moral forces. Right, I could have not done this if I hadn't studied, for example. Like, if I met my, 4 years old, let's say, 4 years ago self, or 10 years ago self, I wouldn't like to be that person today. Yeah, maybe I would like to be still, more driven at the time, because when you're younger, you are more driven. You have apparently more morals, forced to spend immediately, right? Then when you know how to manage the thing, you do it more strategically, in a sense, also more rationally, but you realize that also in the shorter run you're less capable of making all that effort you were capable of doing before. This is a bit the compartmentalization of moral forces that is so risky, in a sense, as much as the trick of intellectual superiority, right? It's a very double-edged sword, right? You don't know, it can't be positive as negative. You can because you at that point, yes, it's a theoretical system. It's about you essentially starting to gamble with reality, saying, I am so confident about things I know, and I think that I will start adjusting my life on the basis of such calculations. And then these calculations are, in theory, aimed at let's say providing a greater, in fact, achievement, a greater, properly from an economical point of view, say, how profitable was this, and then, but since it's on a larger scale, even when, certain things fail, they take a high moral toll that the greater that investment is, and the greater it weighs. And this is exactly what I've been experiencing myself recently. So and when you take that blow, you start realizing, say, wait a second, right? What am I essentially if this whole thing collapses? What am I if all this theory isn't standing on its own foot, and that's where when you realize that you were too confident about your own capacity to make it. You can even spot kind of a gold standard, at some point in your life where things seem to work well, and maybe it's we are especially let's say set in a way for which we tend to believe that before, in a way or another, things were better. In part, it is true, right? In part, there is that kind of recklessness that, if you, don't really care too much about things, you don't even see them, as I was saying before, but at some point you also realize that you were much less capable at the time, and also you did some very, very stupid things that you could have corrected had you gone back in the day. It also depends on the personality, on, let's say, on character, nature, things like these, and of course we all have a different. But there are some, even biologically speaking, in aging, some similar patterns and paths, in fact, that we share in the process. What's the point with moral forces, though? So how do they intervene? Is there a way to cultivate them? Well, in a sense, all this, bigger management of the same moral forces is what growing up, I guess, and developing as an individual is about, right? And developing meaning expanding your own capacity to achieve, right? Not just aging. There are many people that are still children at 80 years old, and frankly, as I must say, I have basically the only human group I have some kind of tolerance or leniency towards is literal children, biologically, in terms of age, because at that age, children may do stupid things, but hey, they're still learning and they're meant to do that, right? So they may have been raised in a disgusting way by their disgusting parents. That's something that I noticed ever since I was a child myself, looking at kids, and some behaved like animals, and frankly I didn't, and I always felt as if they were some people were just exploitation and not much else, and I presume that they're the same morons that I see around all the time at this point. But it's those are, children can do evil, bad things, right? It's the trick of nature, right? They look cute, but technically they're just horrible little persons, right? They do atrocious things. They're very evil, right? And they know very well, right? You can't fool a child, right? A child will understand things much more than you think. But then when you are, you pass the mid grinder from your early teenage, and you start to form some moral background, and you're entrusted with backbone. I mean, you're entrusted with some responsibility, and you start to be accountable and responsible, in fact, for them. At that point, there is no excuse, right? I have no respect for age, for gender, for nothing, right? If you're an idiot, you deserve to be treated as such, because that's the only way you can form the moral backbone, hopefully, and some people just will not. That's why I'm a great fan of authority and discipline in a civilizational sense, because those who do not obey must be forced to, right? When there is an evident need. Where you can't, this is debatable, because just today we're debating about, think about the vaccines, all this stuff. That's not, let's say, as a standard. That's not just as a modus operandi, oblige people to do things. No, that's stupid. That's just political illiteracy. You have always to consider, in every situation, what's the best thing to do, and opting for it. If you can, also in terms of practical applicability. I don't mean that. I mean the fact that most people do not care about self-improvement, and therefore represent a burden to the rest of the community. A burden that, frankly, the rest of the community doesn't deserve, humanly speaking, in line of principle, to pay for, right? So given that we are part of the whole group, well, we should at least toughen each other up, right? It's like with things like bullying, right? Bullying is a serious thing, but it doesn't mean that the problem nowadays is not much about the fact that whether bullying should exist or not, because bullying will always be there. The problem is how, what's the moral backbone that we provide our children with, instead, being able to cope with a bull instead of bringing a gun in school and shooting them all. Because that's just a parental failure. That's just essentially even young adults that an abomination of the dignity of mankind. That's just the declaration of weakness and in fact, of paranoia and incapacity of coping with reality in a sensible fashion. That aside from mental illnesses and other exceptions, but we always have to look at human evil, right? At malevolence per se, right? Humans are malevolent per se because they're stupid per se, which means that they have an intelligence and don't use it. Right, that's what a stupid person concretely is, and that's why that person has to be disciplined the hard way, right? And the reason we say the hard way, who knows what that means? It means that, I don't know, the hard way is somebody deciding, even in our society, enforcing the law, right? Law enforcement cannot, if there is not that, there is no world. You can't enforce parents to send their children to school, for example. You can't enforce people to respect, I don't know, driving like anything, right? Who does decide at which age you have to vote, and how is that? It's arbitrary in a way, and in part it's surely an interesting topic of debate. But this has nothing to do with the fact that we are enforcing laws in order for them to fix problems in reality, because those problems exist, right? Never think that humans start from a precondition where they're all good and nice and obedient. Humans must civilize, and since we are military historians, we know that basically the history of human civilization has passed through the physical annihilation of whoever impeded that path. And of course, this may have also not been done all the times from an ethical standpoint of sort, but most of the times, even just the idea that exists today, you're conquering other people's country is such a bad thing. Well, if you look at it in historical perspective, most of the times this happened. Not all times, but most of the times this happened. It's just simply because that people didn't have the moral force to defend themselves, right? If you look at the rise and fall of empires and states and countries and people and so on, what you actually see most of the times, it's not like somebody was dueling, like rolling the dice, saying, I want to conquer you. Okay, let's roll the dice. Who won, who lost? Okay, I won, and I take your own country. It's about somebody resisting to another power that most of the times is not, like, there is no such thing like a crushing. Like in war, nobody starts by knowing that they will win, right? There is, in a sense, here the disease of the concept of geopolitics that revolves around the fact that there is some kind of fixed standards that even states are somewhat a monad, a reality, so kind of a metaphysical entity. It's not really like that. I mean, there's an international community, so at that point, the moral forces are measured, like today, on a much larger scale and on very different dimensions that were measured up to, I don't know, just 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And at that point, when you see that a culture is collapsing, well, at that point you can't really, who are you really blaming? Well, of course you can't blame the people, in fact, the same people, but those are the ones that are going to lose, right? So isn't it kind of obvious, at least, that things work to work this way, right? It's not a matter of prevarication. It's not a matter of, say, I don't know, you can't just hope for certain systems to hold them. So this is also a Clausewitzian concept, right? When he talks about the partition of Poland, he simply says something that makes your blood, freeze in a way, but that is dramatically real. That a state that cannot defend itself cannot even pretend that somebody is going to come to their help, right? Literally meaning that either they get conquered by another one, by one state or on another, but surely they will not be able to stand on their own feet. And this is the history of mankind in a nutshell, right? And at that point, you can't even complain if certain things happen. Now, I made the Polish example just because I was struck by that, and as von Clausewitz, by the way, as he explicitates in that passage, and myself, I have in fact, a great sympathy for Poland, historically speaking, but that's a good example to show at the time of the partition, by the way. So you know what was there, essentially the collapse of a monarchy because of the strength of the oligarchs that had prevented the development of a centralized system. So at that point, who's to blame? If not the same people who, at the end of the day, got partitioned by other countries. So that's where at least the moral. That's what von Clausewitz says. That is always beautiful. Also, that a government can act only by detaining or having from their side better the decisive moral force of its own people, right? Which I don't know. By medieval times, you could argue, all right, well, it's not the tree, right? But in certain historical contexts, when you have, in fact, oligarchies, it's easier to see how the oligarchs by themselves are more directly responsible of the average person that lives fundamentally in their shade. But in part, it's also that, meaning that those people still provide with some, in turn, on a smaller scale, with that support, right? It's the same way when you look at the fact that, I don't know, let's say, National Socialism was democratically elected, even though with, yes, some, at least from an institutional point of view, of course, there had been dramatic violence, but that had happened from both sides, and effectively one side lost and the other won. And at that point, it won because it was voted by, the decisive majority of people that, push it to power and kept it in power, right? And that thought that it was even a good idea after World War II for some 10 years or so. Why? Because of course you cannot govern a country if you don't have that support. So as always say, never think that the people are martyrs, never think that the people do not actually ask for what they will get, right? And a great part of this stands properly from within the moral dimension. So moral doesn't mean that you're a good guy. It really means by how much you are driven, right? And hell, the Nazis were driven to conquer all over Europe until they were stopped. So, which would have been, it was a bad idea in the first place. But technically speaking, when you look at the fate of the world and how things go, or this is such a thing, it's always about this. If you look at, I don't know, a person being raped and you in front of you and you don't intervene to save the person, well, say, okay, but I could have been harmed myself, I could have been killed, it's not worth it. Yeah, okay, but how do you think that is going to resonate in the fabric of your own society, right? How do you know that you won't be the next one to be raped and nobody's moving a finger, even if they're sitting next to you, right? Before, if somebody mistreated a woman, you would just, send him to the hospital, right? And today it seems like nobody cares. Like we complain so much about violence against women, that as also forgetting the one against men, as much as we complain about bullying. But what are we effectively doing? Do you think that people are more willing to defend a woman today than they were, I don't know, half a century ago? I don't think so. And part of the reason why this is not the case, unfortunately, is that of course there are less moral forces. That before men were properly educated to be more aggressive. In part, this was also a problem because it's a kind of a mob-like mentality. I give you that, but in the moment in which the state fails to provide that kind of security, etc., you see a woman being aggressed physically by a man. The first thing you should do is starting to go there and attack the guy, right? And of course, if this guy is like a giant and you're just a midget, perhaps, it's not me, it's not a sensible thing. But the idea is that there is a community, in fact, that we're not alone, and that moral forces, in fact, are something so important because, in a way, they are unpredictable because they have to do for the most important within the most important dimension to a large scale. Right, it depends on what people vote. It depends on what people accept culturally. It's a big thing. It's about political cohesion and all these things. So it's very easy to spot a weakness in morals because in the same, how does science or history fits in this? Because the method shows you how this is true. If you meet a person that is selectively concerned about certain things rather than others, right? It's like I don't know. There are so many examples you could make, but it's like I don't know. The first thing that comes into my mind, it's like people who like vegans, but pick that. I know hot topics. I'm sure that I have vegans among my subscribers. It's not an issue. The issue is when you talk to a person that may have that kind of aim. Like the idea is that I don't eat animals or animal product in the first place because I believe killing animals or making them live in certain conditions is wrong. All right, you care about. I understand that. All right, and all right, but what are you doing like for the broader political, military, social issues of the world you live in that are radically more impacting and serious and literally take out hundreds of thousands of people without, even being presented in the news, like literally an economical policy? Or how do you think that necessarily just, opting for a certain, like if you really care about animals' life, like even if you choose like a certain to do a certain thing rather than another, even without doing certain things, that it will somewhat directly produce the death of some animal, right? Of course, you can't get at that level of systemic, scientificity in the way you operate, and it's more maybe about the moral symbolism of, say, I don't want to fuel, let's say, the animal exploitation in a direct sense, but when you understand that maybe behind that or besides that there's no other concern for dramatically more important issue that are present in community, you know that person has, it's not double standards, it's simply not having standards, it's simply being illiterate at so many levels. Of course, that person may not know, may not understand, and in fact that's exactly what we're creating today. Because before people were more wired to the world, there was a much more pressuring one. So not necessarily there were more morally refined people, but at least they matched the expectation of what more or less that world had to be, right? And the fact again that we are ever more detached from that positive application, that makes us vulnerable because it doesn't present us with the actual pressure. At least even when we are under that pressure, we didn't see the connection anymore. And this is an historical process that happened a lot of times, and it's documented. It's documentable even for today because we know it's effectively happening like that. There are certain specific ideologies that are gaining ground because they, of course, flatter the mediocrity of the individual. They flatter the idea of, after all, we all have what we need, right? So somebody can pay for it. Until that person remains without things to pay, and the whole thing collapses because wealth is not to be found, falling from the skies. So the moral dimension here is crucial because I wouldn't like this system to collapse before having the same drive that could have, pushed, even just our parents or grandparents to work or to have a living, to make a family, right? And that's why this is dangerous, because you can debate about the naturality or the artificiality of the whole thing, but the point is still that you're leaving this world and you have to cope with that, whether or not. And presenting with a certain moral backbone and example is a sacrifice, is bearing a cross, right? That's why I also tendentially sympathize with the elite in the measure it's as the government, as in because of its centrality, the government actually embodies the most rational element of society, because those are the ones that have more evidence, more they're presented with the more concrete side of the story compared to others, right? Not that the elites cannot do wrong things, again, it's just that tendentially they know what to do next step. And the people all together, that you may find people, of course, that would be much better in place of that government in a sense, but in considering the community as a whole, those are in a sense irrelevant. There is a debate also on how much a minority of people can influence the majority, which is a very interesting field and of study, in that actually is used scientifically even today to make no, these masses lean from a side to another. And that's in a sense what the elite is doing. So never think that behind incompetence or apparent incapacity, things like that, there isn't something more scientific in practical purpose, because things are often much easier to achieve than it seems, right? It's just flattering this broader popular dimension is a is an art, right? That's what politically speaking, rhetoric, propaganda, all these things are, after all, designed for since ever. So really nothing new. But in fact, the way we still surprise ourselves, these things happen. It reveals how much we are, again, detached from the reasons that, in theory, make our moral systems. That is to say, if you forgot about that, it's because you forgot about things that I presume your parents or grandparents would have not forgotten. And intergenerational debate in this sense is very interesting because, of course, new generations have to learn everything from scratch again. And in the past, we had pretty interesting things that we came up with, civilization speaking, that, again, like von Clausewitz, for example, that we don't even care about anymore. And why? Well, again, because it doesn't seem there to be any kind of apparent need, right? It's just that just in planning and strategic thinking, it's not really a good way of operating, saying, I'm here, I'm just happy, I don't have anything to worry about, and that's pretty much it. It would be interesting to decide, but that's just to give maybe a hint of how complex it is to manage a moral dimension. So when you shrink again back to an individual, and you say, how can I do this? Like, how can I cope with this thing? Well, essentially there are two ways, but it's dangerous, right? Those kind of things, don't try it at home. But unfortunately, we have to try it, at least if we want to have some, capable life, capable of bringing civilization forward, because there is no other way, really. The first thing is of course, self-improvement, which doesn't mean, again, I don't know, studying for 5 minutes and then rewarding yourself with a Nutella box, I don't know, for that kind of personal accomplishment. That's not really how it works. It really works more with a real commitment. It is to say, you should put yourself in trouble, such as starting to study, starting to work, doing things that are challenging for yourself to reach a result, right? And at the beginning, you will not entirely understand why. That's why the situation of young people is critical today, because we are arrived at a point at which their parents themselves were in the same condition they were without that pressure to not really being able to spot the necessity, for example, of studying, like diminishing, for example, the nature of tertiary education or what you can achieve through that. This seemingly has become quite common. I don't need to study, I don't need to improve, I don't need to discipline myself, I don't need to work that much. I need just to measure my success through how much I can make a month. And maybe sacrificing also a lot of other things. The broader purpose of civilization is, of course, obtaining the greater results with the least of effort, right? Which doesn't mean that you have to start by making the least of effort. It's exactly the other way around. You have to break your back, essentially, finding out the way to do that. And until you don't work, and so you produce and do that thing, you can't quite learn it. So that's why it's good for your parents, as I was always told, you have to study and you have to work. To inculcate that since an early age, say, okay, people say, it's not an imposition. You want to essentially, command your child just to be free. And no, it turns out that children are, dramatic learners, and that children are probably the most precious of our resources in field of investment in absolute sense. It is to say, if you start teaching children, for example, just from an early age, it turns out that if by 4 you haven't learned manners, chances are you're going to have severe psychological problems in general in your life. You'll not feel fulfilled, because you will at that point live in a world where adults fundamentally distrust you, are fake to you. They tend to accept the fact that you're there, but you just behave like an uncontrollable mess. You will essentially, and without control, because parents are, of course, ever more scared of discipline, of teaching, of providing that kind of control and guidance and authority. They let you do whatever you want. Well, if you have been raised like that, chances are is that you're not going to be a successful person. And this, again, successful doesn't quite mean how much money you make. It's fundamentally how fulfilled as an individual you will turn out to be, and just balanced from a psychological point of view. To maintain the reins, because this thing of moral forces, it's like a storm, right? And if you are not strong enough, you're going to collapse. There are people, I presume, that collapse much more easily from a psychological point of view. That is to say, of course, the mind is a pretty strange thing that we still have to properly investigate, but I think I have this suspicion, even though I'm not understanding much of neuropsychology, so I can't just guess. But in practice, I believe that what could make a person crack in most of the times is what a person with more experience and capacity normally would be able more to withstand, because it has already endured more, especially in a prolonged time, right? Time. We are obsessed about quick things, about I have to get immediately that data. It's like with history now, right? You want my videos to be short. They're never going to get that short. Well, that's just like a yes, it is true, as a matter of fact. But what I mean is that literally, if the point is the thing has to be short, like aside from YouTube videos and especially Schwerpunkt ones, but in anything, like one thing is either you have a dramatic qualitative thing that makes you understand things immediately, and having handy things and useful things it's useful, yes, but for that those should be some catalyzers, certain instruments, certain means to an end, if you want, to nurture something way more complex. And it's like, I don't know, I make research all the time, and I do search for stuff on Wikipedia sometimes to refresh the memory, to know. But I will never use Wikipedia in a scientific publication, nor unless it's a picture or something. But why? Because of course, and understand that until I don't know what it's behind that and how true it is, what that thing is written, if it's just a note, a reference to some other work, I don't know. I'm just basically abandoning myself to passively to an information that I have no way to verify. So first of all, yes, working hard. Like you should, I don't know, I should talk about this at some point, but there is this crucial moment, especially in middle school, in which your brain is what you molded at that point in your mind is what you're going to remain with for the rest of your life, largely. Then high school is capitalizing, building upon it, right? But the structure, discipline, method, resilience, going on without any rest, or at least the due amount of rest, but really having to do just that, right? I think it's good, especially if you are a teenager or something, to make sport, for example. That's important, but that's yet another thing that should teach you to be to work hard, to control yourself, etc. But your first concern in the first place should be the school, right? It seems to me that at many levels at this point, the school is not really even a priority for many people. It's just something that that happened to them, that they had been sent to. At least before, it was in very archaic times, it was like that. People had to work in the fields, and they didn't send their children to school because they needed labor force. But today, it's just school objectively is losing given the formula of it, it's losing great part of its effectiveness. Like basically, I think easily in 10 years or so, the quality of school, I think all over the West, has simply like maybe halved itself in quality, in usefulness, in any kind of. It's a generational problem in part. There are many reasons, but at that point you should also, I think, school should provide you, at least more than with anything else, if your parents haven't provided you with that, the realization that you should be learning constantly by yourself, aside from school, aside from anything. Because if by, I don't know, 16 years old, you haven't understood that studying is a necessity for yourself to grow up like a functional individual, basically you will remain a child for the rest of your life. And in fact, it's not surprising that, even if, when in high school you find some people behaving like jerks in a sense, you meet them after 10 years and you realize that they haven't really changed that much. Maybe they do something, maybe they're even successful, but at a moral level, they don't seem to have really improved or detached themselves more than much from that kind of childish mentality. A continuous improvement is easily spotted in people, and it's easily also it's easy to fail in it at the same time. For now, I could digress, and I'm probably sounding too acid and grumpy and annoying. But the question is serious, right? That even certain subjects, as you know, I think historians and those ones that improve themselves for real in this sense are really privileged, right? And there are a few of them, telling the truth. And even there, it's not even about history, I believe, provides you with this all kind of, depending on which history you study in part, but generally teaches you to really start from the fact you have to find things out. Not in a pre-planned fashion, but really you have to start to build the basis yourself, which is a radically different thing, for example, from most hard sciences today. And I've so far in my life, at least where I live, I've never found such a low degree of ideologism and dogmatism as much as in the history faculty. And history, because even just if I move slightly aside towards archaeology, if I move slightly aside toward philology, I see two more radically, violently ideological worlds that I don't recognize, right? Even though we should be all historians at that level, it's a completely different thing. And that's why method of framing the unknown still is so, and not the laboratory mindset, is so crucial for our world to grow, because it's the best way to refine your synthesis capacity, your criticism, your rationale, your an unprejudiced mind, right? So working hard should work in that sense, right? And especially when you're young, that school, can be demanding. In my case, I don't know, it was demanding. That I studied all the time. I learned a lot of things. But also I realized I had to learn more because I had the possibility, but especially had the curiosity. And again, if, let's say, school should always should hopefully provide you with the best perhaps thing you can develop, to the initiative of doing that alone, right? If most students I've met are just, I have to do this thing, and I don't understand this subject, I don't care, so I hate it, down with school, it's useless, let's go out. No, right? School is an opportunity. It sucks the way it is today, no doubt, properly but because it prevents you from learning that, right? It's in a way, of course, the same school problem. It's the same community problem, right? The teachers are somebody's children, somebody's parents, right? So the situation in which we are in is not that those are special people that endowed with some special, absolutely not, right? Frankly, you know that I'm completely straightforward with you, but I have negative prejudices towards basically every human group. And I can tell you that some of the most radically ignorant and uneducated people I've ever met were school teachers. And I'm not kidding, right? They could be dedicated people. They could be, in a way, even doing their job, formally well, because they have to fulfill some kind of, but in terms of, personal background, like culture, education, open-mindedness, scientific culture, humanistic culture, zero, right? Or at least something, but something anecdotal, like notions, and not really a structured, systemic, developed intellectual background. Absolutely, I never found anything like that. The only people I found like that are university professors that you can disagree with. Not perfect, we know, but at least most of them are really people who have studied their own, even if narrowly, say narrow-mindedly enough, that just their own field of expertise, but at least they are aware of the complexity of reality because they literally spent a lot of time studying that, right? And they passed through also some degree of selection, so they weren't just the first idiots that you met in the street. And you can grow with them at a certain point, right? Then in theory you should reach them if you want to follow that path, and that's the point. And in theory that's also what teachers should be, but unfortunately it's not the case. And that shows you how moral forces are important in our community, because properly the formal, the institutional paths to reach certain are, let's say, transversed by people who have different moral drives, right? One thing is to want to become the next expert in the leading expert in the world about a certain thing. Another thing is just, I want to become a school teacher so I can get, a salary, right? And then pretending that this has anything to do with my, my great moral, great intellectual development. And unfortunately, we see there how the thing works. Most of the time, again, there are good school teachers, even just in terms of some capacity. I've met, I don't know, some of my high school professors were developed people, right? Just to think that we're not clamorously capable. You see that they had stopped learning at some point, right? Even the most developed ones, just you could say, I don't know, they would make some of the most stupid mistakes, like literally in geography or names and languages. But let's say, in part, of course, the word developed. It's just you understood at some point they had stopped because life, because at some point, of course, you may simply have to stop studying, and that's, of course, the problem. Again, that this doesn't go in parallel with, okay, but I should do something in the meanwhile that maybe brings me further, because even, let's be honest, I would never be able to teach kids. I find terribly annoying even just teaching university students in the first year, because simply I'm at one point where I don't care. Like, I've always studied history because I wanted to learn more of it for myself, right? So I've never done it concretely for others. I started Schwerpunkt because I wanted this to be the only place where I can space with my mind the way I present these problems, these issues, and so on. But if I had to be a high school teacher, I would shoot myself. Like, I don't think that I would tolerate that. I'm sure I would familiarize with the kids. It would be even nice, we'd get attached professor to, you go. But I like, professionally wise, to me, and scientifically wise, it's like, my God, it would be too. I wouldn't do that, right? I literally prefer to do something else, some kind of more bureaucratic work rather than that, because I just can't stand it. And in any case, I think that, in fact, this is the problem also with moral forces, that they are resources that you have to invest somewhere, right? Investments, as we've seen, are risky. And so this was the first chunk. You should educate yourself like crazy, especially if you are still, before you're 24 years old. You should read like crazy. Consider this: at 18 years old, you're already old to, for example, learn languages or things like that. You're already old. At 24, your prefrontal cortex fundamentally solidifies completely in the way it should, and so you are more rational, but you're less foolish to invest yourself in such a risk that could be just learning for the sake of it, right? But that's exactly what you should have done, right? You can't make miracles later on, and that's why, the eternal students, those, in terms of those who remain always the same level, that say that, I want just to take a second degree. Yeah, it can be useful, but it can be just like, I don't know, going to the movies, right? It's something you do just to amuse yourself, or maybe to lose a bit of time, or to because maybe you have some easing from work if you study things like that. But the the purpose should be to always project yourself on a higher scale, right? And that's where, as I was saying in the beginning of the video, the problems really start to be serious, because at that point, again, you don't start just learning more or handling more, but this knowledge, this awareness makes you ever more in fact aware of reality in a way that, in a sense, you would have, you're definitely enthusiastic about, but that from the other side makes you realize how important such awareness is. And when you don't really find it in other people, you start saying, wait a minute, but then is the world really going on without this, the knowing certain important, like the essentials? Because it's not about the refinement. When you see it from the other side, you say, well, these are just, and I know, because some scholars perfectly give that impression, and I can relate totally, and probably also sound like that at some level. But let's say, what you discover, it's not just a more elaborated extra knowledge. It's literally a knowledge that encompasses the world, starts giving a substance to the whole reality. So literally the fundamentals and the essentials, right? So that you also grow more intolerant. I personally, I noticed that in a few years, my capacity of compromising with people's behaviors has dramatically sunk. So that it's also part of the reason why I'm worried when I meet somebody that I like so much, and that I eventually lose, because it turns out, well, in the case I get disappointed. Of course, I'm kind of used to it and say, the hell with that, wasn't just enough. When I disappoint, I suffer, because especially if I care about, I even care about Rex. Let's be honest about that. It's a bit of gossiping. I've always been sentimentally involved with women that had some problems, right? Problems could be like, it could be their background in general. It could be mental problems, could be poverty, could be serious things at a time. Not quite always, but still, I've always liked to help, right? So I'm not a crude asshole that just wants to tell you, look, I have discovered these things and I want to impose on you. On the contrary, what hurt me so much last time is that history was there a way to improve a person's awareness, and that person was not receiving that, because it thought it was kind of a criticism, or kind of didn't feel adequate, perhaps, and it was so bad for me that just would go unnoticed, because it's the same problem that I'm documented with the majority. You're trying to make a point that is important for everybody involved, and people get paranoid because they're cognitively dissonant. They just deny reality, because they realize if they got to that point, they would have to cross out a great part of what they thought was their own logic, that you're not imposing on them, but that it's an obvious kind of implication from a logical point of view, and that cannot be. And this has to do a lot with identitarianism, with ethno-nationalism, with tribalism, with populism, with a lot of issues that are like just a primitive form of self-defense that, however, in reality doesn't work. And part of the reason why such wreckage occurs is that exactly, those persons had to navigate the waves of life through such, in fact, a wreck itself that is shattered all the time and has taken them down. Instead, I am a person who says, I had the possibility of doing this. I can't give it some practical, even if it's theoretical in nature, but it's still a practically, positively applicable thing. And that starts becoming too challenging, and it's something negative happens. So I hope that this is not the case in another scale with you as my partners, I must say. But I don't think so, because you have a completely different approach. This has nothing to do with, with sentimental things. But I get it from just the amount of views sometimes compared to that I think most of my videos, like people watch them, but it's not that they actually understand what I'm saying, but not because it's difficult to understand or because they're stupid or something, because just they're not interested, because just they maybe just want to listen to my voice, or for some odd reason, I must say, or they get, I don't know, a 30% of that in their content with it, and so on. But concretely, I believe that there is a problem of properly of worldviews, in a sense that is how used you are just to frame reality while you get into it, while you try to explore it, to understand it, and it may not be so obvious again that a certain concept to be understood, even when they seem particularly evident. Now, what I was saying is that through all these issues, there is one crucial factor that is what brings you to as close as to what von Clausewitz says that I concretely strive for when I study military history, because I understood, morally speaking, that it's the most important thing. It is properly to understand how much you're driven to achieve certain things, and this is not just so simple in terms of of force, right? You can be a dramatically, for example, courageous person, but this has nothing to do with how you're going to employ your action. Von Clausewitz calls courage, for example, the most noble of feelings, but he also says basically by itself it's completely worthless, because if we were just driven by courage, or even just by determination, so there's this specific type of courage to take action with the way we know what things are, we would stop fundamentally at the first obstacle, right? Because without reason, without a scientific understanding, without that side, there is not really that much, right? I'm not a military man, so I've never been also much in fights concretely. The sport of practice were mostly in solo, like in the so I've never quite competed a lot with others. I mean, I did at some point. I played, I don't know, in high school we played volleyball, we played football, I don't know. Yes, I liked that competition. I think it's especially for a young male, it's something that grasps your mind. You want to be aggressive, you want to be competitive, you want to win. That's good, right? But at the same time, here we're talking about war, so something that wipes out any kind of possible, not just of game or sport, etc., but even reenactment or possibility of literally going into war without going to war. And since I studied just war, so at this point it's the crucial point. I always say I know I lack that dimension. I know nothing about the atrocity of war. Not much in, I don't know, I have Stendhal syndrome when I visit some places in history. That's basically the only time I can get emotional. But if I see the most horrifying pictures of people killed or something, I don't, I'm completely desensitized to that. Probably in reality I wouldn't feel like that, but in practice, what I realize, and that impressed me so much from a moral point of view, is that, of course, if life in just the normality of circumstances can provide you with such hard blows, what it means to be in a war in a prolonged sense, that is just to say to be on campaign, on a battlefield, and having to cope with something that von Clausewitz explains us pretty well what it is about. It's about risk. It's something you can... it's the adaptation of human mind to risk, in a sense. There's a beautiful passage in film critique in which von Clausewitz says what it literally feels like to approach a battlefield from the rear guards to the front line, and it's horrifying, because you say, how can a human brain exist in that circumstance? And he says, at the beginning it's disconcerting. You're always scared. It really never ends, in a sense. But at a certain point, you habituate yourself to it, and therefore, at that point, it's just how much you're able to bear on the long run. And there are certain other passages about marching, about privations, about the most unspeakable kind of suffering, that you realize factually what war is in terms of that burden, right, of that shock, of that trauma, of that increasing pressure that exists on minds in war, right? And what is difficult there, and that I think it's pretty relatable to anybody who suffered of depression. I think I never did. I may be a tendentially melancholic person, but a case of depressions in my family, yes. But, and I think I never experienced it. But I can tell you that in some moments in which I had really very strong pressure, either for environmental problems or for a prolonged, I'm convinced at some point I had some adrenaline dependence. Mild one, because you can't never quite scientifically say, not empirically, but what's the boundary between pathological and something normal, like for cyclothymia, and tendentially more cyclothymic rather than for the other disturbance. And so, especially feeling these extremes, right, and back and forth. You think in war, right? These things are like they're gonna literally blow your mind. Right, people think war is tough because people bleed or there is violence. That's I mean that, or because it's physically extenuating. Yes, that is true as well, but that is nothing. I mean, literally nothing compared to the mind burden. That's enormous. That's crushing. It rises, by the way, paradoxically, much more in positions of command. More they are detached from the battlefield. The battlefield, in this sense, as horrible as it is, has paradoxically much less to do with the broader weight that individuals, people get to get killed, but they don't get the same psychological pressure they get while they are at the top in terms of determining what needs to be done. It's something exhausting. It's something that only certain specific people can do and achieve that, and they run out of, not everybody's a military genius. So it's really a complex thing we explained in the Filmkriege, but fundamentally there is one thing, that is when you are crushed by moral pressure, you fundamentally feel as if you were giving up. You're feeling as if you were essentially having an anxiety attack, a panic attack, or simply you're being shrunk. You may fall into depression. You may be so burned by this, you're literally burned out. Paradoxically, in those videos about the berserkers and the Ulfhednars, etc., we were explaining this, right? This kind of literally people burned themselves to death, right? In terms of within, like these people would have a collapse, like they would make some internal vessel explode, like those in that sense were very pressured in the moment. But let's say even those who survived eventually couldn't quite go back normal. That's a typically post-traumatic stress disorder. Quite easily you can read it in the sagas and things that people couldn't, but they wanted to come back there, right? And that's essentially what such illness is about fundamentally. It's the idea that in civilian life you don't quite feel well anymore because in war you had people you could rely on to save your lives. When you come back home, you don't have that anymore. And if you have this conditioned reflex, about, I don't know, you hear some gas exploding in the car, emissions, and you think maybe it's a shot, right? If you freak out, you have automatically this reactions to what you would have been, brought to react to. In fact, if it was an ambush or any kind of attack, and it is terrible because it's your mind who drives you there. And this is the worst. Like for anybody who has had depression, that what they tell you is that the problem with depression is that you cannot quite choose to be in that state or not, right? Or at least that this is also more shaded, that meaning that many people are radical, and that's also misinformation as far as I understand, about the fact that depression is just something you cannot control by default. And it is true. There are some even chemical deficiencies, and think about even heal cures with lithium, all things like that are particularly effective, by the way. But those are for stabilizing the mind, right? This is in general the broader, there's bipolar disorders, things like that. I've met people who had depression and bipolar disorder at the same time. It was terrifying. But the question there is, the there is this sense as if you couldn't, in fact, quite do anything about that, right? Your mind just brings you down. You don't want that, but in part, reality is both, right? It's that the mind is actively operating for doing that, and part of the reason that there's never like kind of a standard, but it can be understood when you get paranoid, if you have some fixations and so on, that your mind automatically goes in a certain direction, especially when you live, through certain experiences that have habituated you, one or another, to such kind of, of feeling, like of simply getting there with, when, I don't know, even as a normal reaction when you're annoyed, you think it's something that made you angry in the past, or you have this kind of things that you realize that you say, okay, well, it's not really an issue, but after years it can become a burden, something heavier to bear, because you don't quite control it anymore. You just use it as a vent, and you insistate that fundamentally, and that's really not good. So you have to be distracted in a way or another to fix it. So sometimes when you really care about something, and that you can't quite achieve that, and that makes you feel as if you were losing something, and that that there is no reason for it. You see, that's the point, is when you develop certain responsibility and capacity, you know how hard it is to get certain things right, and it is always more frustrating fundamentally to really understand that reality is unpredictable, yes, but that you thought that situation didn't have to go like that, right? It's a strange feeling in a sense, because this is what that experience makes you capable of, as we were saying before, in reasoning in a broader sense, so that you can think that some investments, especially on the long run, are going to be successful or not. And when you counted so much on certain thing to have, it could be an illusion, right? You could delude yourself. It could be correct. It could be false. How so many, I don't know, marriages that go broke, let's say, over time, because it's normal to change. Individuals do change, are not always the same, and they are largely uncontrollable, because humans are truly uncontrollable, and the fact that we can't just play with the masses, etc., doesn't mean that you can't quite control what things are going to happen. History shows that everything changes in ways that we fundamentally cannot predict, because if we could, we would have solved basically all of our problems. This is not the case, and not only it's not the case, but that will escape your control, even just in a much simpler level system, like an interpersonal relationship. So at that point, there is one stage when you really cared and this thing broke, and you lost it, and you realize it was a failure, it was a defeat, it was something that it's hard to accept, like a loss, a serious loss. And the thing could be changed in a sense. There is a dangerous moment, because from one side you would like the thing to continue, so you kind of deny reality at that point by certain standard, or you. So the hopeful thing that will happen at that point is for you to fix it, because it will fix it by itself. Like a healthy mind is able just. It's gonna suffer, but it's going also to readjust itself. The problem is how much you had lingered on the hope. Like, how much do you think the thing can be fixed? And there is a rational component in there. It's essentially you are guiding yourself into that. Like, you are you're bringing yourself to say, okay, well, it doesn't quite. It doesn't quite function the way it should, but I will do it anyway, right? So that's a trick, because it's your mind that tricks you in itself. You say, it's like addictions, right? It's really about addictions. You say, well, one more will not be a problem. It will actually be, right? Especially if that more becomes yet another one and another one and another one. You don't quite fix the reason at the root. Sometimes you would like to say, I would like to be without feelings, so I would just play logically and rationally. I wouldn't have to cope with the situation. And instead, that's tricky because you always have that kind of feeling. So at that point, on the long run, that can even escalate into paranoia for real. Especially when you relied at so many levels on that thing you lost. So this can bring you down at many other levels. It can bring you down in your work. It can bring you down in anything, right? And everything will be a difficulty. Sometimes it's just a sum of difficulties. It's not even one specifically, right? It can accumulate. At some point you will be shattered by all these hits here and there. And your capacity to, let's say, to mitigate that it's not, the more you're doing, the more you're capable, the more you're responsible, the least will be avoided. So you must have a thick skin at that point to take all those blows. And those blows sometimes on the surface really do not leave a trace, but within, underneath, they really do, and you should be very careful about that, about how much you can handle, right? Because your brain is not as new as as before. Like this tiredness is you can just get this stress. You can get only a certain amount in your life. This is also famous from a military point of view. That I think today a professional militaryman cannot serve in combat for more than 40 days. In their career, because they otherwise they're literally burned, spent, right? This was discovered during World War II, that some veterans basically had fought so much, and not even so much, that when brought in the field again, that they should have done who knows what, and they dramatically underperformed because they were spent, they were exhausted. At that point they should be used as trainers, instructors and so on. Well, this is a bit like with you. You cannot spend yourself literally entirely for something that is not really going to work. You have to make a compromise, but at the same time, you know that this compromise is based on things you want and things you care about. So there is going to be always a pressure that is one that effectively exemplifies what you're losing in absolute terms, right? And not just as, let's say, because there can be a broader failure, and at that point it's like you're boom, like it's a great blow, right? And that will pressure you dramatically. So and at that point you bail out, you continue, but in any case you're accumulating that burden, right? So normally functional activities are at a minimum of that kind of sufferance, that kind of spent forces, and they should go on to a point where, I don't know, you retire or you have worked for a lifetime and so on. When you get so many hits, it starts becoming a challenge. So at that point, I think the most important aspect of moral forces stands, of course, in how to spend them. So rationally speaking, right, the more we're capable and responsible, it's because the more rational we are, because the more we have properly a logical and critical understanding of reality that has taken a concrete form under our eyes, and we can almost scientifically measure by experience, by practice. And at that point, you know what you would like to have. You even know that in the past you have suffered maybe equally, and you have spent so much of yourself, but then afterwards it was better, right? So you know that even though this thing accumulates, yes, it in part it goes away, but you should also be aware if it's too deep, it could be permanent, or at least literally shaping, especially in certain moments of your life, your mind in a completely different way. And that at that point you must want that, right? If you think it's worth going on, if it's right, if it's good, if it is what you really want, you have to go on. And you decide that, well, good luck, right, with it. But at that point, otherwise you can let go. And not always insisting is the best option. right? It can be really, really challenging indeed, to give up, but at the same time, it may be for the best, may make you suffer less on the long run. It's like a war, right? We think that after all, but at the time, it's really nothing so bad is happening. But maybe the more it goes on and the more losses we get, and the more we realize it was not worth it. It's something that happens over time. In a way, we can't predict it. So that's why we are so challenged at the same time, because again, it's a gamble. It's a very military concept. It's a Clausewitzian one, properly related to the military, to violence, how you use that kind of force, because that's a force. That's how hard it is, how costly it is. The trick there is not to go down. That is to say, the moral force in itself is about feeling, let's say, that you want to give up, you want to break down, you want to essentially explode, because most of the time it's literally your self-containing, disciplining yourself. It's maintaining a strict code. It's knowing rationally that a certain behavior should be maintained, even with this enormous emotional drive that tells us to do otherwise instinctively, right? This is so true, even in war. That's the nature of discipline in itself, right? Just being strong or courageous is not going to make the thing done. Civilizations evolve exactly the more they are able to deliver blows in a functional way that is based on the collective effort, the concerted one, this kind of spirit that permeates the whole, rather than what in the sum of the individual forces. That's strategy in a nutshell. It's always relative. This is what I'm saying. It's relative to the situation, and you have always to measure it for that matter. And that's always remember that you can never quite start with a strategy and thinking that it remains unvaried. It always changes in everything. Like in life, in war, there's not a second in which the best strategy is different from another, right? Or even an instant. And you always have to update that. You always have to plan that. That's strategic thinking. That's what makes you grow effectively. And the trick there is, if you want, is a banal one, right? There are certain things that make you suffer, right? You can avoid them. There are things that drive you. There are things that make you realize that you have to go into the meat grinder and that you're going to take losses, but it's necessary. Well, at that point you will feel down, right? And the protraction of that feeling is dangerous, because it is the one that is going to make you paranoid, that is going to make you fixated with that specific threat, with that specific aspect that you don't quite know whether it's the right one, it's on which to insist, right? You don't know whether it's the Schwerpunkt, and you don't know whether it's changing, because you're emotionally struck by it, and therefore you're kind of absorbed. Your attention is based on that. The reality of the situation can be naturally more, let's say, even worse in a sense. Maybe you're woken up when you see that, for example, you were investing so much in a certain sector, you had made all your plan because you wanted to believe that thing would work out, and then reality manifests itself all of a sudden, and you realize that you had completely missed the point. That, especially in terms of moral forces, you hadn't considered how much also the other side or the broader side in the world was going. And at that point, you find yourself saying, I'm an idiot, right? I did all this, not realizing, fixating myself on this, and that teaches you, of course, to be more open-minded. It teaches you to be more, insightful, to be more, comprehensive. And the difficulty is the synthesis. The difficulty is not much how Machiavellian you get in the negative sense of the word, but how let's say how open you are to all the things that could happen, right? And that you should think, and that the worst things you don't want to think about, but are exactly the most important ones at some point to think of, because in the moment in which they will happen, because they will, if you haven't quite adjusted to the situation, you may receive one of those blows that may scar you for life, right? So it's it's a very cynic, if you want, pragmatic, and also it would be better, in fact, as a cold rational thinking rather than an emotional one. But also without emotional drive, there is no such thing like moral force in the first place, nor those objectives, nor that interest. So again, if you want to be successful, you're condemned to fuel yourself of moral strength to use in some direction that, however, will unavoidably crash somewhere. But if you didn't have that, you wouldn't learn, you wouldn't get anywhere in the first place. So that's the sacrifice that you have to be willing to pay. And the trick, as I was saying, is really thinking that you have the upper end of on yourself, right? There is this trick before you fall in paranoia and even in depression. You shouldn't, of course. It normally won't happen, right? Sometimes certain things happen and it seems like, the whole world is crumbling. But, after a while you realize that after all, it wasn't that dramatic. We often fear rather than, wanting actually to experience certain things. And instead, that exposure can help, right? Especially if the previous side was not so delusional, or we had just rush in just without any previous good consideration. So the important is not to get a tunnel vision. The important is to be aware of the fact that you can distract yourself, that there are other things in the world that you have to be aware, and that you can pursue your objectives, but by knowing that, of course, the greater the aim, the greater the risk, as always, and the effort, right? So it's not just, again, rolling the dice, it's literally doing the damn thing. And that's why we tend to underestimate that most of the moral forces will be spent in that thing if we want really to make it happen. And so intelligence and this drive always should cooperate. And the important thing, though, is never think you are defeated. Never think that what happens has, let's say, a defining value, an absolute value that you cannot fix for, let's say, for yourself to start something new again, right? That's a very common thought. It has to do with how much confidence you have for yourself, within yourself, and your own self-esteem and all of these things. And of course, you toughen yourself up over time. It's just that the results can be very different. Meaning that again, if you don't expose yourself intelligently to such things, you don't grow. At some point, you will not be able in your life to be resistant to certain things, right? So it should, cultivating yourself constantly should always be a priority in this regard, with all the costs that it entails, because that paradoxically is going to be better, even if you don't see it. Defeats are much more marking than victories in our world, and they are because victory and defeat, as we explained last winter, are completely relative things, right? There is no such thing like a victory or defeat in general, because it's about, or at least, as they should count proper, that is defined on your intention. What is that you wanted, right? And so not fixating in that sense with something unrealistic, or let's say something that just by the event that you cannot change realistically, is really something you should always be aware of. When you want to convince, for example, or to, at some point you give up, right? Because you know that if somebody is not open, is not receptive, there is no way to do it. So this is a way, of course, to give up, but it's a way maybe you can do better somewhere else. And so that thing that at the moment may seem a defeat, on the long run will not even be remembered, because it may have actually provided you with something important, but still you may have achieved so much more, in fact, through it than whatever you had lost through that encounter, in a way. So always feel as if there was as if you were superior. In a sense, never think to be inferior, right? But never think also that others are inferior to you necessarily. Never underestimate. Never think that you have it all, right? But just know to be aware of the situation, and to know that you're going to make it, even if you don't make it, right? Because That may seem a strange idea, but it's really the attitude you should have, because when you lose moral forces, you may you may discount how much you actually have still with yourself that you can make good use of. So I know that sometimes hearing those moments, right, but you have this, you have that, you can do this, doesn't make any sense because you had so much hope for certain things to happen. But at the same time, it is still true. You can achieve a lot through that you can't quite see in other ways, right? Because you haven't tried yet, right? And that can be heartbreaking, because you may say, "But I cared about this. I truly did. It was a defining moment. Maybe it will define your life, right? It's just that you are the only person that at that point can make the difference between, remaining there and feeling marked by that for life, or actually seeing it as an opportunity to have learned something, and something really important, which you surely will reflect for a long time, that you surely will not forget, but in some time, maybe not soon, but later enough, let's say later enough, but not even that too late, you will make you understand that it was positive for you to have withstood that blow. And that without it, you would have been worse, right? And there are certain things that really redefine our lives, but this doesn't mean that they are there just to depress us, to bring us down, to make us think that it's over, we shouldn't do anything, not to have any motivation. It's an illusion, right? And the most eye-opening thing is seeing sometimes, as always, it is reality itself. Because if reality went another way and you understand reasons and you can see them, at that point you have really what reality is. You see, reasoning by hypothesis, coming back, torturing yourself, saying, if I had done this, if I had done that, well, yeah, you may get to some point in that sense to really understood what happened, but the important is that it happened, not that you can't go back in time. You can be safe enough. You can't go back in time. So it's actually an opportunity to show you how certain things because sometimes it's the first time you encounter certain situations, right? So it's normal not to immediately understand. It's normal not to be able to cope with them immediately, right? It's really it's how you grow. It's the process of learning in itself, right? So it can be challenging. Again, it can be exhausting sometimes, but it will not eliminate your, hopefully, for most of the times, your chances to do great, right? And to recover from that. And again, it's very hard to cope with that. It's very challenging. Nobody says that it's easy or that you can do it without paying anything. You always have to pay. But it's that worth that defines the whole thing. It's how much you're able to. And after all, it's always less serious than it seems. It's just for you not to leave on with that ideas, essentially with the denial of reality, for saying, okay, well, now we'll just live in the memory of such. It's not good, right? So we can always help. We can always do something more. And sometimes it's so hard that we break, right? But it's not so often, right? It must really be something atrociously hard, like those things that are unspeakable, right? And we can seek help, and there are means to feel better. But for our moral capacity, what really matters is how much you're able to think of yourself as the one who is feeling, the way it should, right? And so not making too many illusions about that, but not many delusions about that. At the same time, not thinking negatively, and just abandoning yourself to those things that just make you hate for the same time. You should be able to look back at them and exposing yourself to them at the point even of saying, this is so harmful, it doesn't make any sense, even just to see what's the difference from reality, right? Literally get out, go talk to other people, do something that distracts. And when you come back there where the thing happened, physically or mentally or both, right? You always remain with yourself, and it's moving. I give you that. There are certain moments you say, I wish they could come back. Well, they can't. And as hard as it is real, right? But it doesn't mean that nothing can come back, that better things can come up, let's say. It simply means that we're humans, that we're living, that we have a given time, that we have to make our best with it. And so engaging ourselves in activities that are meant to open up ourselves in a way to, if we are habituated to really go out there and do the thing, that can give us a motive, a reason to engage ourselves in other ventures, in other opportunities, in other hopes and dreams. And I know that, in fact, the least you have such possibility, and the harder it is. And so that can start a spiral of paranoia, fixation, depression. But it's really easy to get something new, as a just physically meant, like as a system, like something that we didn't know of, or something that we still wanted to understand. Or so there are ways and ways to approach reality, and it is good sometimes to suffer, even if at the moment it doesn't really feel good, even if it feels miserable, right? If it feels as if, but I just don't like this feeling. Like I just wish that this feels so bad that I don't have any purpose in feeling like that. And that's exactly actually a good understanding of the situation. It means you expose yourself to such things at the point that you quite see that it's not worth continuing like that, and therefore you can always find something else. And sometimes there is not necessarily happy ending, but are we sure that happy endings actually exist in the first place? That just making it is a matter of, again, that's always relative, right? You can always see what making it means or makes you feel like, and that's, I believe, the important, in my opinion. There are certain things we will never be able to answer, right? And fixating with those is not the way to cope with them. Sometimes it's just to move on. And sometimes it's just to accept things as hard as it gets. It's a path, it's a process. It will be marked with disappointment, with bitterness, with rebellion, with coming backs, with this sense of desperation sometimes, because you should despair at some point, something. But once you metabolize it, once you rationally understood what it meant, even with all the unpredictability or all the sometimes the impossibility of knowing quite what happened that didn't work, right? That's what moral forces are better exercised in that, because it makes you understand how easy after all things are, that you don't really have to find such a complicated mechanism to explain certain things. Certain things just happen. Certain things just are maybe fruit of a certain decision, or the fact there was no specific drive, commitment, and it's normal, I guess. I think it's the easier explanation most of the time. And sometimes the causes are always very complex, right? But in the way they manifest, the thing manifests itself, after all, it's it's what that complexity turns into, right? So until it manifests itself, you could have not predicted in the first place. So that a scientific culture in this regard also helps a lot, because it shows you how you can't really quite regret on something that you had no power on, right? Which doesn't mean that you have to responsibilize yourself, because when you properly understand what you did wrong, because we all do something wrong, even if it's not terrible, even if it's really, most people would excuse that, but I presume it's important to point out to ourselves, look, this was wrong, and that's where you could improve yourself, and that may discover actually a side of yourself that you didn't think until it came out, in that circumstance, how serious maybe it was, or how, what consequences it can bring. That's something you have to live with. I mean, so it is important for you to be aware of that, right? And not just blaming or thinking that, after all, it was something that happened necessarily against you. It's really about, let's say, making your own self conscience analyses, and to let the rest of the world making their own if they want. And if you have some possibility of interfering with that, of course you can try that. So that's yet another challenge. But if you can get into it, right, if you want, and if you don't, at that point the thing will be clear. It's more important what actually happened, that wasting too many resources you could invest somewhere else to understand what the hell that did happen, which is strange for a historian to say, meaning that, of course, that's what we're searching for. But once you have determined that, you have to use it for a purpose, right? That's why we research and we inquire in life, right? Also, how you walk is a challenge, scientifically speaking, because you have to organize yourself. You have to rely on some past knowledge and understanding, and you always have to make that effort. So exercising it is not bad. And sometimes I give you this, that, however, there is a force that seems to be stronger than anything. And you say, if I don't go on, it feels as if it were a lost opportunity. And at that point, I think it's this. If you really want, you are the only one who decides that. Right? You can seek for advice, you can, inform yourself, you can make a reserve, but at the end of the day, the way you did it, and the way you did it yourself, it stays on you, right? So you're in the sense, you can draw comfort and security and, coherence and consistency from the fact that you wanted it, right? So, of course, if you failed, it's bad, because it means that something didn't work out well, and you should accept that for what it was. But if you really feel that something is right, because you have the evidence of that, or at least even if you can't prove that until certain things happen, you just want to go for it. That's what we're meant to do as humans, right? So at that point, you just have to make a cost-benefit calculation. It doesn't sound very romantic in practice, but it really is that. It's that sometimes there are things that seem to go so beyond that we want to insist, and at that point, again, it's the same thing. It's just with a higher bet, right? It's a greater gamble. There's a greater risk. It's up to you to choose, right? And of course, it can become serious. But I think that the best things aren't really come, in a sense, from failures, right? This is, kind of a common idea that without failure, we wouldn't understand really what success is in practice, and that's also true. That sometimes we idealize reality. We think it's there for serving us, and it's really not, right? It's really better to think that we make our own destiny, in a sense, even if there is a destiny, right? I believe in both things, right? I don't think there is a moment in which you can, rule out that things may have actually gone in a way that was meant to be, and that you have to find a meaning to that. At the same time, while you make them, you know that you're responsible for them, for your actions, your free will. So that's a way to put yourself to the test in coherence, because if you see it at these double threads that intertwine with each other, you are able to remain a moral person, because after all, you accept the fact that there is a responsibility, but at the same time, you know that life is so great and varied and unpredictable, etc., that you cannot but feel being guided by some greater force that made it happen one way or another, because that's all what we have, and we want to I think to maintain our banner high. I think that's something like a matter of pride, how much you believe in yourself and how much you like yourself. It's how much respect you have towards yourself for maintaining some honorable stand, even in those circumstances that would make everybody kind of crumble. But even if you have to pay something from it, you still have some some benefit deriving from the belief that you have in righteousness, in justice, in goodness, because those are all different things to balance and consider every time. And if you have a complex moral system that is able to address them all, to look at them and the various phases of reality, sure is you have a better understanding of how to cope, and perhaps you're going to fail less often than others, right? And that's, after all, not a bad thing. So I don't know, I got a bit philosophical today because I really needed to vent of things that happen. When I make these videos, I always feel as if I had said nothing or terribly banal things, but I don't know, I think they may be more important than anything else, in a way. So for today, we stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.